Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cait. I am a master's student in literature and arts at the University of Oxford. Today I'm going to talk through how to read critically and the things that I've learned as a master's student in literature at Oxford University. Now, as a literature and arts student, I'm reading a number of different kinds of texts. I'm reading non-fiction books, I'm reading journal articles, and I'm reading fictional works. And all of these pieces of reading will eventually contribute to my research ideas and eventually my dissertation. So as I've gone through my master's, there's a couple of things that I picked out. Firstly, how to stay on top of my reading. Secondly, how to actively read. Third, how to consider a broader context, and I'm going to talk about interdisciplinarity here. And then finally, how to summarize and synthesize your thoughts so that you can contribute to discussions both within your cohort and in the broader community. And this brings me to the sponsor of today's video, which is Scrintal. I have used Scrintal so many times, and I will show you in this video how I use it to summarize, synthesize, and formulate my ideas around my dissertation research. But Scrintal have also provided me with a link for you all, which will be in the description box below. I am also really excited to say that they have redeveloped the way that they do their boards, and I've gotten a sneak peek into the new boards version. This is something that's going to be launched early October, around I think the 8th of October. And the new boards are absolutely amazing and so cool. And prior to them releasing the new boards is that the current pricing schedule will go up when the new boards are released. So if you've been thinking about trying Scrintal out, now is a really great time to take advantage of their current price schedule by using my link in the description box below. So thank you to Scrintal for sponsoring another one of my videos. I'm always really grateful to work with such an amazing brand, and honestly a brand that has significantly contributed to my master's as an Oxford student. The first thing that I want to talk about is how to stay on top of your reading. Now, Oxford is notorious for providing extremely long reading lists. And I'm here to tell you that you do not have to read everything on that list. Oxford does this. They just put every possible text that they can onto a reading list. But the way that I have learned to do this is to go through the reading lists and identify texts that you will be interested in. This is to help sort of provide a space for you to really narrow in onto a subject or onto a topic and know that topic really well. The likelihood is that other people in your cohort or in your class will find other things that they find interesting. And as such, you'll be able to get a broad understanding of the greater reading list by just being able to focus on your topic specifically, and then learning to engage and actively listen to your colleagues in your cohort. So the first thing that I do when I get a reading list is that I look through the list that is provided. I identify texts, sort of themes, ideas along which I would be interested in reading about. So for example, in my upcoming residency, I looked through the incredibly long list of books that we had to read for my literature module. And instead of reading all of them, I pulled out a couple of those texts just for me to kind of understand. And what I'm starting to see emerge from that is the theme of women's education. And that is likely what I'll end up writing my research paper on. By spending a bit more time at the start engaging with your reading list, you should be able to reduce your workload in the long term. But in order for this to actually be effective, you will need to actively read and actively engage in the text that you decide to read. Now, obviously, preparing for a class or preparing for a seminar, it is necessary for you to do the reading, and this will take a little bit of introspection when you figure out how long it takes you to get through a particular number of pages or a particular number of texts before a certain time. But just be conscious as you're going through your reading list how long it's going to take you to complete these readings. Another thing that I would like to point out here is that you don't necessarily have to read everything. I know that I have certainly benefited from listening to some of the texts that are on my list. So one of the books that I had to read for my residency, I started reading it, I found it very, very dull. And so I actually looked at the audiobook, gave the audiobook a try, and the narrator actually brought the book alive for me. I found that so useful to be able to actually still engage and digest the book itself and the topics that we're going to talk about now, while not having to sit and physically read it. And I know that there are a number of applications out there that will read your PDFs for you, provide AI summaries for you, all that kind of thing. And I would highly recommend looking into those so that you don't necessarily feel like you just have to sit down and read and engage with those texts. You can actually find ways to get the information from those texts that you need in a more succinct manner than just sitting down and reading them. So the next section of the video is how to actively read. And I know a lot of people really struggle with this. I struggled with it initially as well. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it does take practice to become an active reader. There are a number of ways to annotate texts and a number of ways to pull out the key phrases or key thoughts in a text. I won't go into that. I think it's a very personal thing about how you go about doing that. For me, the way that I annotate text is that I always annotate with a pencil, and I will mark particular pages in my texts. Usually if I have sticky notes to hand, I'll use a sticky note. Otherwise, if I don't have sticky notes to hand, then I just unfortunately dog-ear the pages that I want to come back to. Another thing that I end up doing is taking photos of the pages that have references to things that I want to talk about, and I'll show you why that's important in the next section. But taking photos of particular paragraphs or particular quotes is really helpful for me to then have that at hand and be able to incorporate it into my contextual analysis, which I'll talk about next. But active reading requires you to engage with the text by underlining, highlighting, making notes in the margins, which helps you to stay focused and retain information just that much better. But more importantly, as you're going through this text, you will need to ask questions. Constantly ask yourself about the content. Do you understand what is being said? What is the character saying? What is the argument that is being made in this journal article? What evidence is provided to support it? For literary students, this is particularly important as you are reading fictional text, because a lot of your characterization in books is not what is being said, but what is being shown. So often when you are reading about a character and you're trying to understand, for example, why you believe this character is obstinate, for instance, you would have to be able to draw evidence from the text itself to justify your rationale of why you believe this character is being obstinate, or why this character is being proud, or etc. And being able to identify why you make those conclusions or why you're drawing those inferences is a big part of active reading and actively engaging in the text. Further, you can use this in journal articles By understanding the evidence behind an argument, you are more likely to actually understand what that journal article is telling you. And furthermore, you're then able to maybe decipher if there are any gaps or weaknesses in the argument. The third part of this video is considering context. And the reason that I want to bring this in here is because the biggest thing that I've been taught in my master's is how to look at a reading, how to look at a text, how to look at a piece of art, how to look at a historical event, how to look at those sources in an interdisciplinary manner. And I feel that this has really distinguished myself as a candidate for PhD, is that I have brought in a methodology for my analysis, which isn't a literary methodology, it's actually an art history methodology. And that use of interdisciplinarity is so key and so important in understanding the context in which the primary source that you are looking at exists. So think about the historical, cultural, academic context in which the text that you are looking at is written. It's one thing to know when the text was written, but if you, for example, are looking at women writers like Mary Wollstonecraft or Jane Austen, and you're unaware of the profound difficulties of female authorship of the time, you may not fully grasp the importance of the text that you are reading in front of you. Actually, for the time in which she was living and the time in which she was present, it's really incredible to see the amount of social observation that she was able to capture into her writing and into her authorship, especially given the limitations that were placed on women at the time. It's a similar argument that is made to Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft was a highly, highly educated woman for the time, which was unfortunately quite unusual. And her insights that she brings into her writing are new for the time and very profound for the time, so much so that she actually is isolated in society. And without understanding that context, without being able to see that this is the space in which these authors were writing these profound canonical works, you really are missing a huge chunk of what this text means. It also will provide this sense of perspective as you are writing. It's very, very difficult, obviously, for us to assume what an author's intention was when they were writing a particular piece of text, but we might be able to gauge what that author would have been faced with, what kind of challenges they were faced with, what kind of environment they were living in, which might add some insight into the text itself. But most importantly, and this is where the interdisciplinarity comes in, is that being able to relate the text to other works you have read, other concepts that you have learned, or even other primary sources of the time, be it some artwork, be it cultural phenomenon, be it historical context, be it even representations of particular phenomenon in architecture, for instance, can really provide a broader academic view of what you are studying. So for example, let's say you are looking at female images in early modern England, which is what I'm currently looking at for my dissertations, female images in early modern England. I'm looking at how those female images were translated into texts like the Fairy Queen. So, for instance, I'm going to look at particular artwork that was available at the time, and there are further things to think about when it comes to that. I want to look at what women's roles were at the time. I want to look at authorship at the time. I want to look at art revivals or art representations of the female body and what these might say, to analyzing even more this canonical piece of work that I am currently researching. By engaging in these broader questions, you are then able to make those connections across your subject and create a greater understanding that can ultimately lead you to a very rich academic discussion of your thoughts and opinions. Now, it's one thing to be able to read all of these things, but it's another thing to be able to make connections across these different aspects. And that's where I have found that Scrintal is absolutely phenomenal. So if you've been here for a while, you know that I use Scrintal all the time. But what I've started using Scrintal for is to bring in the connections of my ideas, particularly for my dissertation, with the books that I am reading for my research. So this is a copy of my reading notes board that I have for my dissertation. It outlines for me the particular key questions that I am looking at, namely the methodology, the primary source of the fairy queen, for instance, analysis of religious imagery that I am going to look at in terms of artworks, as well as the religious images that I'm going to look at, which is particular artworks of the period, as well as references to the Bible. I'm also going to look at particular travel narratives, deriving the source to see if there is an impact on colonial imagery and female bodies in those travel narratives that are then translated into particular female characters in this piece of work. I'm also going to explore Celtic mythology. The way that Spencer has written his work is very much against Ireland and Irish culture. And as much as I haven't explored this too much yet, I do feel like there might be a connection with Celtic mythology, particularly in the images that he utilizes for the female villains of the Fairy Queen. I wanted to show you how me reading broadly and critically for my master's dissertation and for my research has led me to create this effectively this really profound connective map of my thoughts and ideas. And I can build these out with cards and with ideas. But what I wanted to show you here, for instance, is being able to then pull in those pictures that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, those pictures of quotes that I have. So for example, here what I'm going to be able to do is pull in a picture that I took of a reading around female education and put it in here to identify that while I was reading this particular literary text on female education, it applies directly to my ideas, and I can trace that continuation of my ideas quite clearly in Scrintal. And this is so helpful to be able to see a holistic view, an organization of the chaos of my thoughts in a profoundly clear, well-developed manner. The importance of being able to summarize and synthesize your ideas and your arguments is that it helps you enhance your understanding of what you have read. It can also help you prepare for discussions on your research and on your essays. By engaging with the text themselves, formulating your own opinions, it actually opens you up to considering alternative viewpoints and thus developing your own opinions based on the evidence that is presented in your readings. By engaging in discussions with your peers and tutors about this text, it can also help you to gain further perspectives and deepen your understanding. I would also recommend, after some time, revisiting your notes and the text. You may notice some differences or some fresh new insights when you reread a particular text, and by having your notes in an electronic format like Scrintal, it's very easy for you to go in and update those ideas. So that's those are my 4 tips for reading critically. Remember that critical reading is actually a skill that improves with practice. The more that you read, the more that you apply these techniques, the more natural and effective your critical reading will become. I hope that you found this video interesting. I hope you found this video helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Bye.